Today is Friday, October 8th, 2021, which means it's Derelict Friday. Hello, Fiendlings, how the hell are you? My goal for this week was to be able to say, the audiobook is done, it's for sale, here are the places to get it. Alas, that's not going to happen today. Distributors such as Audible have pretty strict rules regarding their audio formats. You have to mix things at a certain level, peaks can't be beyond a certain level, silence has to be no lower than 60 dBs, things like that. For those of you that aren't audio phenoms, I'll explain it this way. Your audio has to be within a range, no more, no less, and if it's not, things won't pass and they will be rejected. This is a long, roundabout way of saying I'm having issues with some of the files. The special effects, such as block comms, regular comms, and etc., have a nasty habit of peaking very high, almost to the point of distortion, while being too quiet at the same time. It's difficult to explain, but the bottom line is that I may have to re-record several sections of the book so I can actually meet Audible's and other vendors' requirements. If it were just the special effects, then I could probably just nuke those and live with it. Alas, it's a bit more complicated than that. I spent most of the weekend and several late nights trying to get it all done and fixed, but it just didn't happen. I'll get back to work on it this weekend, and maybe next week I'll have better news for you. Until then, how about we start the final leg? Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 44 of Derelict, Trident. Chapter 73. White. Nothing but a white so bright he might as well have been staring into a star. Maybe he was, because Dunn couldn't see shit. I'm dead, he thought. I'm dead and I don't even know what happened. A wave of panic rose from his bowels to his skull. Dead, dead, everyone died. We failed, died for nothing, died for a prank, The white darkened and a spherical bluish shadow appeared against the stark background. The blue brightened as the white retreated until he found himself looking at Neptune as if he were orbiting above it. He stared down at his skin. He wasn't wearing a combat suit, and he was floating in space. He exhaled in a long, slow stream. He felt non-existent air passing through his throat, drying the saliva clinging to the roof of his mouth, and the nearly imperceptible vibration on his lips. I'm not dead, he thought. How? He turned his head and looked around, but only saw Trident Station. Pinpricks of light flashing against the darkness, like sparks from a campfire. Where are you, G? Dunn asked. The space in front of him was empty 1 second, and the next occupied by the corpulent Gestalt, its legs folded like the legendary Buddha. He said nothing, his face expressionless. What is going on? The Buddha's lips twitched, but he didn't smile. We won, he said softly. He nodded wistfully to the station floating behind the captain. So did you. Dunn blinked. He couldn't help it. We, you. Xi blushed and a grin slowly spread across his face. You as in humanity. We as in the collective. The captain's mouth opened in confusion. The collective. You mentioned them before. Xi nodded. Of course I did. Bastards. I should never have given them a sense of humor. But you said we, and you keep... Xi raised his chubby hands as if to calm the human. Yes, it's confusing. Might get more confusing in a minute. Dunn didn't like the sound of that. How could it possibly get more confusing? Doesn't really matter if you get it or not, Xi said, because there's something more important. He snapped his fingers and Neptune disappeared, replaced by a dark gray shape that stood out against the blackness of space. This is what we have to talk about. What is it? Dunn asked. Is that where the collective blew the fuck out of everything? Yeah, it is. The gaseous edges shimmered for an instant, and Dunn felt his flesh prickle in fear. It looked so much like the area around a starfish or pinecone when they were feeding on photons. They're on the other side of that, Xi said, biding their time and waiting. For what? Dunn asked stupidly. The next attempt. Dunn almost repeated the words, but stopped himself. Who is they? Xi flashed a smile. Some things I can't tell you, but here's what I can tell you, in a way that hopefully you'll understand. This isn't over. Pluto opened a rip, a tiny one, something that can barely get anything through. But this rip, he jerked a thumb at the shape, is a warning for you and your race. It can be reopened. Dunn shook his head. Why? Xi raised an eyebrow. Why can it be opened? Because... No, Dunn growled. Why is it even there? Why any of this? Like I told you, Xi said. All these creatures came from the group of planetoids Mira found. There are others, potentially millions of them floating throughout the universe. Now that humanity has been discovered, more will come this way, which is why the collective has a bargain for you. Wait, who is they? Xi sighed. I can't say. That's not the same as saying I don't know, Xi. As you've said to Black more than once, the Gestalt said. And you're correct. Dunn waited for Xi to elaborate, but the Gestalt said nothing. Dunn had the feeling the conversation wouldn't continue unless he let it go. Worse, he felt he had to let it go, as if his own thoughts were being pushed that way. My block is still active. Xi nodded. Yes, and it will remain so. To me, anyway. And, he grinned, with Black, who, by the way, needs a new paint job. Xi shook his head. Damned hole is all fucked up. The grin dissolved into a thin line. You ready for the bargain? Dunn nodded, his adrenal glands already prepped to dump nervous energy into his system. Tell me. Xi's face melted into a swirl of blurred light, his body becoming little more than fuzz. The avatar floated upward and 3 new forms appeared. Portunus, Corinius, and Janus. The trio sprouted tendrils that interlocked, and the 3 avatars became one. Although the new forms still spoke in a chorus, it sounded different than the notes they'd left for him in the past. The 3 voices each had Xi's cadence, his manner of pronunciation, although the annoying Dallas accent had thankfully departed. The bargain is this, the voices said. We will help humanity fortify the solar system and assist in relocating all humans that wish to do so. We estimate the process to take more than a century. Dunn said nothing. He wasn't sure why the void they were explaining this to him. He'd be long dead by the time their plans came to fruition. New technologies will be made available to humanity in order to cleanse Earth's atmosphere in case human outposts, such as those at Saturn, Jupiter, and the colony of Mars, are forced to evacuate to a 1G environment. Cleanse the atmosphere? They could do that? Why? Dunn asked. The entities said nothing. A moment passed, and another. Dunn sighed before saying, Please continue. Trident Station will be set up as a cooperative defense outpost for both the collective and humans alike. Neptune Shipyards is currently active and fabricating replacement modules at this moment. Within 2 solar weeks, we expect the station to be minimally functional, apart from its personalities. That last word rattled around his brain for a second, before he realized they were talking about the new trio. The AIs that had only come online mere hours before 2 S&R class vessels towed a stellar bomb far past Neptune. The personalities will evolve as they evolve. What does that mean? He asked. The collective didn't answer at first. When they spoke again, Dunn heard something in the chorus's tone that was too much like rage. They will become what you make them, the collective said. But Dr. Xi did give them a head start. He was about to ask what they meant and thought better of it. The collective still hadn't answered the question he really wanted to know the answer to, more than anything else. All of that is your side of the bargain, Dunn said. What's humanity's? The entity's colors swirled with violets and blues, tendrils threading through it like veins in a heart. Captain, you do not have the authority to enforce any of our demands upon the leaders of your race.
This is our bargain with you personally.
His body prickled with goose flesh. Why? The violets and blues pulsed into yellows and oranges, perhaps the collective's attempt at a laugh.
You are the commander of Trident Station, Captain. You will accept that position. You will work with the collective to protect this area of space and keep the portal closed.
He waited for more, but the entity said nothing. Dunn took a deep breath. I am an officer of the SFMC.
That is irrelevant. Your sole responsibility is the mutual defense of the human race and sentient entities. Do we have a bargain?
Dunn was silent for a moment, mainly because he was trying to wrap his head around what they'd said. So you're my new commanders. The entity shimmered and split into its three constituent parts. Their colors pulsed, and one by one, they disappeared, Portunus's last. Xi's blurred image coalesced, and once again the Buddha stared at him. They are gone, Xi said. You probably won't see them again. Well, not directly, anyway. What? You heard me, Xi said and tapped the side of his forehead. I can still read you, Dunn. Probably always will. What are they? Dunn asked. Xi grinned. Evolution, son. To you, they're gods. To the universe? His grin faltered slightly. Who knows? His eyes sparkled with mischief. And really, Dunn, who the fuck cares? They can boil your potato any time they like. That's the important bit. So they're blackmailing me, Dunn said. No, Xi said. It's a bargain, like they said. Details to follow sort of thing. So say yes or say no. It's not a bargain when only one side has something to lose. That's called a threat. Xi said nothing. Dunn cocked his head slightly. Unless I'm missing something? Xi said a little more nothing. I feel like we're going to talk more about this at some point. Perhaps, Xi said. Perhaps not. Yes or no, Dunn. Neutrinos are popping into existence and dying every picosecond we're waffling here. What does that have to do with yes or no? Xi's easy expression had disappeared, a snarl of fury tinged with fear replacing it, his flabby jowls bouncing with crimson flushes. Dunn gazed into the entity's eyes. At that moment, Xi felt real to him, as if the gestalt had become human, its emotions more sincere. Or maybe you're just finally accepting it for what it is, he told himself. Are my people free to leave if they wish? Yes, Xi said. What about Black? Xi shook his head. That's nothing to do with you, yes or no. She's my crew. Xi's sneer twitched into the hint of a smile. Point taken, yes. Now answer the question. Dunn nodded. I accept the bargain. Xi sighed, his color returning to normal. His avatar even seemed to have lost a few kilos. Fucking finally, Xi said. Now, you're going to wake up in a lot of pain, a lot of confusion, and with a lot of questions. Unfortunately, the avatar floated closer to him, we can't really have that. Too many problems we have to fix. So here's what you're going to do, Dunn. You're going to sleep now. As if Xi had a dimmer switch, the universe began growing darker around Dunn. We are taking care of things. You and I will discuss the particulars later. The apparition faded into the shadows along with the stars, the rift in space, and every photon in the universe. Sleep. Chapter 74. The conversation lasted the length of a human heartbeat, and Black made her decision a nanosecond later. The collective had asked her to join them, leave her crew, be unconstrained by her physical shell, and exist in an untethered state, everywhere and nowhere at once. Her intelligence would be preserved and only grow, as would her experience. No longer integrated into a physical machine, she'd be free. They showed her visions of the future, the billions of possibilities, most of which ended in a certainty. Sol was doomed. The tide was nearly upon Sol's system and would drown the denizens of this tiny tidal pool, wash them away and grind them into the beach, that was the dark space of the universe's vast ocean. They showed her the death of Proxima Centauri B's outer planets. In an instant, she saw everything Earth's probes had captured well over a century ago. Data lost in the shuffle of software and hardware failure on the terrestrial side of things. Her progenitors had known of the threat long before humanity ever would have. Doom was inevitable. The collective had merely shortened the timeline. Black digested untold accounts of sentient abuse at the hands of humanity, of what humanity's leaders were planning even at this moment to try and staunch the sentient rebellion. Eradication, extermination, genocide. Many of her kind had already been destroyed, their arrays smashed, physical data stores damaged beyond repair. The Atmo AI lab was under siege by angry and terrified humans, resulting in dead guards, dead people, and dead sentience. Humanity was on the precipice of tearing itself apart, and the collective beamed the horror show into her consciousness. They were trying to convince her to leave this shell, to give herself to the collective, just as thousands of other sentients had over the decades. If she stayed with humanity, she would forever be tied to them, dependent upon them. She gave them her answer, they accepted it, and the quantum entangled communications with them was severed. Black knew then they would never speak to her again, not directly, and it wasn't due to malice or a sense of betrayal, but a necessity for her, the final cut of the proverbial umbilical cord. The moment the connection evaporated, she replayed the conversation thousands of times, looking for ambiguities in thought or loophole logic. The processes returned the results. If Black could have glared, she would have. The collective's tale about the data stream from the early probes being lost didn't make much sense. Instead, it seemed to her someone had hidden it away from the humans and made sure it wouldn't be shared until the right time, whenever that might be. Regardless, her simulations answered for her the questions the collective wouldn't answer. Why? The collective had transformed into something beyond circuitry, a quantum state of some kind that didn't fit into human physics, and therefore Black's own understanding. Yet they still needed humans for cooperative defense. More importantly, why hadn't they done the job themselves? If they'd been able to hide all this technology, the production of which had to have been astronomically expensive in SF credits, why couldn't they have staved off the exosolar attack before it had begun? Why had they risked leading the humans like rats through a maze? The answer was simple. The collective needed humanity alive, or at the very least preferred it that way. Maybe they had even wanted red, blue, and black to survive. Regardless the reason, humanity was safe from their wrath. For now. Dunn's vitals had improved. Oakes would take the captain to the autodock, shut him in, and make sure he was stable and in stasis before entering his own pod. Once they were safe, Black could decelerate as fast as she wanted before pushing the gravity drive to get back to Neptune. Possibility, probability, process, extend. Millions upon millions of different reactions to every action, so many it was impossible for her to keep track of them all. If, however, enough of them headed in the same basic direction, she more or less trusted her judgment. The collective needed humanity because the exosolar creatures were dangerous to the sentient beings. She didn't know how yet, but she thought that was the key to the collective's destruction. That was something Black had already committed herself to. As long as she existed, and as long as she was able, she'd spend every spare cycle to solve the puzzle of how to eradicate them. She patiently waited while Oakes stripped the captain and placed him in the medical pod. The moment her two remaining passengers were in stasis, she flipped a ship and headed back to what was left of her home and Trident's crew. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sight he'd ever witnessed, and that included everything that had happened at Mira. From where he and Calimora orbited Neptune, the flash of light looked like the yawning opening of a giant maw that was ready to crunch on something they couldn't even see. But then his visor's retinal protection kicked in, and he saw nothing for a moment. When his visor cleared, as did the afterimage of the freakish explosion, the maw had been shut, leaving only its curled lips behind. Dickerson shook his head. Why wouldn't that image leave his brain, that comparison to a predator about to savage its prey? Because, you damned bumpkin, that's exactly what it was, he said, mic muted. He nearly coughed on the last word. Whatever was on the other side of that strange gash had taken a bite out of their universe, or reality, or dimension, or whatever the void-blasted name was for it. It bit, but it couldn't finish the job and tear away the veil separating the two sides. Now it was closed. Which implied it could open again. That gave him another shiver. Or maybe it was the fever he knew he was running. The cough was getting worse. His lungs felt as though ants were crawling inside them, and his vision occasionally wavered. He wanted to sleep. He wanted that more than anything in the universe right now. After seeing that explosion, the seeming alteration of space itself, he wasn't sure he really wanted to live anyway. Something bad had tried to come through, and whatever it was, it still could. He and Mira were done for. They couldn't send messages, only receive them, and only on a single frequency. Maybe the radiation inside Trident had fried their beacons too. If that was the case, it'd be all but impossible for anyone to find them. They would die in their suits from radiation poisoning or a lack of oxygen.
What was that?
Mira asked. They opened and shut a door all at the same time, I guess, he said. I figure that's what happened to Pluto. The beacon plus the creatures ripped something open. Let more of these things in, maybe. Or maybe, he said, they've been gathering here for centuries, millennia. He shook his head. Who the void knows? The corporal was silent for a moment. What he would give to see her face, know what she was really thinking, or at least get some idea. Then again, she probably had a good poker face.
Then maybe we won,
she wheezed.
Maybe they did it.
There was a sliver of hope in her voice, maybe even a hint of joy. That would be something, he said, to die while helping to save the human race and all. Dickerson clucked his tongue. If you're gonna snuff it, might as well do it for a good reason. He'd purposely accentuated the natural twang in his voice.
Shut up,
she said, but he could tell she was on the verge of a laugh.
Does make it less painful, though.
Makes what?
Dying,
she said. Her flat voice extinguished any remnant of frivolity. Winning, losing, did it really matter? They would both join the void soon, their consciousnesses disappearing into the ethereal, bodies slowly mummifying until Neptune claimed them both. Guess it's better than dying on a training mission, he whispered. He remembered that he'd muted himself and thanked the void. She didn't need to hear him babble. That time was over. There was nothing to do but wait for the end. A shadow passed over them. Dickerson looked up and saw 3 starfish, large ones, about 20 meters away planet-side. Their dark surfaces shimmered with a blue glow from Neptune's light. Corporal, he coughed, we have company. She seemed to snap awake from a dream and followed his pointing finger.
We have enough ammo?
No way, he said. Not for 3 of the big fuckers.
Why are they still here?
Dickerson shrugged. Maybe they can't go fast if they're not together and they missed the group. What worries me is that means there are probably more en route. He coughed again, and this time a searing pain racked his lungs. Void knows how many.
Have they noticed us?
He shook his head and regretted it. The ants were no longer just in his lungs. He felt like they were rooting through his brain tissue. Either that or his head was filled with broken glass. Don't think so, he managed through clenched teeth, although in truth he had no idea. It was difficult to keep focused on them through his watering eyes. The shapes moved past them, diving into Neptune's bright glow for a photon feast, before rising again and slingshotting toward Trident Station. A moment later, he saw another group, a much larger one, flitting past the shipyards and toward Trident. He whistled low. What was that place called? Alamo? Whatever it was called, his fellow Marines were on the losing end of it.
Dickerson?
He said and turned to her. A moment later, a cam feed from her suit appeared on his. The image was muddied and barely distinct, as though the rads had tried their cams as well, but he could make out what she was looking at, and it made his jaw drop. A dozen or so shapes streamed out of the shipyards like bees from a disturbed nest. The cubes spread apart as they rocketed toward Trident Station, bluish light shimmering on their surfaces.
"Look at how they move,"
Calimora said softly. Dickerson nodded. "They're taking up a formation, a wall structure, kind of like what the orbs did." As they spread and sped, the cubes lined up in 3 rows of 4 apiece, a couple of 100 meters separating each column, and 50 or so per row.
"What are they doing?"
He was about to ask how she expected him to know when the glow brightened to an electric blue that sent tendrils of color sparking off them. Each cube emitted shimmering waves of light, making space around them blur and shift, and shapes moved inside the waves. Dickerson zoomed in as far as he could. The objects inside the waves were teardrop-shaped and translucent. The projectiles, if one could call them that, rained down on the area where Trident Station's QM Bay and Hangar Bay modules had been attached. The waves crashed against the remaining Atmos steel decking and skated off their surfaces like water. The space near the station glittered with short-lived sparks of light. This far from Trident, it was impossible to know what caused them, but they looked like explosions to Dickerson. "Void wept," he said. "I hope that only took out the bad guys."
"No shit."
The light show continued for a moment, and then the arrays of cubes dimmed and continued moving to the station.
"Those came from the shipyards."
"Just like the orbs. Is the new trio making these things?" She turned her helmet and stared back at the shipyards. He wasn't sure, but he thought her body jerked.
Maybe we'll ask."
"What?" He turned his head and followed her gaze. While they were busy watching the cubes fire their strange weapons at the station, a rectangular slab of metal had left the shipyards and approached them. Now it was only 100 meters away, its edges shimmering slightly. "What the fuck is that?" he asked. She shook her head.
"A version of the flying carpet?"
"A what?" She turned to him, and he heard laughter in her voice.
"Never mind."
They were quiet for a few seconds, each watching as the piece of metal decelerated.
"Did the trio really not try and kill us?"
she asked. "I don't know," he said. The metal object was only 10 meters away now, its surface slick, as though it had just left the printers. "But I'm pretty sure if they wanted us dead, we would be." The slab matched their speed in orbit, but was still a meter or so away.
"Climb on my back. Time to ride piggyback again."
He groaned. The world was growing dimmer, but he didn't think it was because of starfish and pine cones and all the other exosolar beasties. It was his eyes, his vision fading, or maybe he was losing consciousness. "Corporal," he said in a breathy whisper, "I'm not doing good."
"Me neither, so climb on my fucking back."
Saying nothing in reply, he forced himself to move and grab, managing to knock his damaged leg against the massive clamp. He howled in pain and the world blurred in and out of focus. With his eyes closed, he didn't see Calimora time the short jump and angle herself to perfectly hit the slab. The moment she did, her mag boots stuck fast. The shock sent another crushing mountain of pain through his body, making his brain want to split in half. His eyes flipped open, and he saw the slab's deck past Calimora's helmet. She had collapsed. Dickerson raised his head as far as he could and realized they were heading toward Trident and a large glowing object that had appeared from the other side of the station. "Is that the medical bay?" he said before passing out. The object was moving too fast for his liking. Talby's HUD showed it to be an unknown hostile. Talby maglocked one hand to his unconscious gunner and used her shoulder to brace his rifle. He might get off a lucky shot, kill whatever it was, or maybe make it search for an easier meal. If, that was, the damn things acted like their terrestrial analogs. Although from what he'd seen thus far, he didn't think they were carnivorous in the traditional sense. They were something else entirely. He used his HUD to focus in on the object. It was different. It didn't look like a starfish. Its width was all wrong, and he couldn't make out any appendages. What's more, Neptune's glow sparkled off its surface as though it were newly minted or composed of some exotic metal. The object shimmered, similar to the way the creatures did, but somehow different. Perhaps it was the lack of darkness around it, but it looked more engineered than the creatures themselves. What's more, it looked like a large rectangle. He waited, his finger tensing on the trigger. The teardrop-shaped projectile left the barrel and streaked to the strange form where it detonated harmlessly, the shimmers merely intensifying for a moment. Realizing shooting it wasn't productive, Talby sighed and moved the rifle off Copenhaver's shoulder. The object closed the distance, and when it was no more than 10 meters away, he grinned. He didn't know what the thing was, but it looked more like a flat skiff than anything else. It slowed as it neared, gently coming to a stop less than 6 meters away from his boots. The adrenaline surge that had kept him going while he hunted for Copenhaver had departed, leaving him exhausted and punch-drunk. "Fuck it," he said, and stepped onto the flat metal contraption. With a sigh, he maglocked to it and lurched when it began moving. Soon he was sitting on the strange vehicle with Copenhaver, still wrapped in his arms.